Hello, good evening. Thank you all for coming. Uh, Make sure you are all in the right place. This is the Ukrainians in New Jersey talk from the Ukrainian History and Education Center. If this is not your flight, please disembark now. Um, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Andrec. I am the archivist at the Ukrainian History and Education Center. I am going to uh, be hosting this presentation, and I will give it a few more minutes here so that latecomers can trickle in. Let me get myself figured out. There we go. All right. So I think most of you, I think a lot of you have been to our previous events, so you know who we are and what we're all about, but I will go ahead and review that regardless. Uh, what I first want to say, though, is that this is a multi-year project. This is the second year that we are working on this. The work from last year, which is covering the period only to just before World War II, is currently online at the address that you see there. And this has been a part of this whole project has been made possible by funds from the wonderful folks at the Somerset County Cultural and Heritage Commission, who are regrantors of funds from the New Jersey State Historical Commission. This has really, they have been a wonderful help and in many ways, as you will see. So for those of you who might not know us, we are in central New Jersey, roughly between Philadelphia and New York, a little bit closer to New York. We connect generations by telling the stories of Ukraine and Ukrainian Americans. We have a newly revamped website, which tells you a lot about, which provides you kind of the same information that there was in the old website, but it's a lot easier to use. It's actually usable on a phone, which was rather difficult to do before. So if you have not seen our new website yet, please check it out. We're really happy with it. So our mission is, we perform that mission by assisting researchers, scholars, and educators uh, through uh, artifacts, providing access to museum artifacts, archives, and what we think might be one of the bigger collections of Ukrainian recorded sound, perhaps anywhere in the world. Among other things, we have an exhibition currently up, which is actually related to this project, which talks about the Ukrainian Orthodox Metropolia Center that's on the boundary of Somerset, Franklin Township, and South Boundbrook. That will be up through um, November 21st. So if you happen to be in the area, please drop by. There are some never before exhibited items in there, and you will learn a little bit more about about the center a little bit later in the talk. We have lots of online and in-person programming. All of that info is on our website, and all of our arts programming is in fact very much made possible by the Somerset County Cultural and Heritage Commission with funds from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. And we would not be able to do what we do without them. So great, big thanks to them. So for this presentation, I would like to introduce my colleague and a longtime UHEC friend, Michael Buryk, and we will be jointly presenting this talk. So without further ado, Mike, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar this evening about the history of Ukrainians in New Jersey. You know, as we sit here now, we have not quite 150 years of history in this state. It's 145 years because the first Ukrainian immigrant appeared in New Jersey in 1880, a gentleman by the name of Paulo Thilak, who arrived in Jersey City in 1880. And he was actually a Lemko Ukrainian from the village of Luchiu, now Luch in Poland. So if we take a look at the timeline overall of Ukrainian immigration, it's generally agreed that the period from 1609 to 1875 was a period of individual migration. And some of it is really anecdotal, but probably the best known Ukrainian immigrant who came to the US during that period of time was a gentleman by the name of Vahapius Honcharenko. His actual name was Humnitsky, and he took on the nom de plume Honcharenko. He was a Ukrainian Orthodox priest from the central region of Ukraine who had wanderings around the globe in various places, including Mount Athos in Greece. And he eventually ended up here in the US. He came to Boston in 1865, went down to New Orleans, eventually married an Italian-American immigrant and headed out to the West Coast and settled in what is now known as the Hayward Hills area of California. I've written about him in the past. You can see some of my articles about him. Actually, I have an article up on Vilny Media, if you're familiar with that. That's a rather newish Ukrainian news service. And there's an article up there about the early days of Vahapius Honcharenko, so you can find out a little bit more about him there. We also have things like names of people who participated in the Civil War, which sound sort of Ukrainian. And actually, some of the people who were in the original Virginia colony might also have been Ukrainian. But anyway, it's anecdotal. It's individuals rather than mass migration at that period. From 1875 to 1940, we have the first wave of mass immigration. 1914, of course, is World War II, which cuts off all immigration to the US at that point until 1920. 1920 to 1939 is generally agreed to be the second wave of immigration, mass immigration to the US. And again, the Second World War cuts off all immigration to the US, and it doesn't resume again until 1947 to 1955, when we have a mass immigration coming, again, primarily from Western Ukraine to the US via some of the displaced person camps in Western Europe. There was a fourth wave from 1988 to 2012. And finally, now we have a fifth wave from 2013 to present. Michael, next slide. The overwhelming number of first wave Ukrainian immigrants came from the province of Galicia in Austria-Hungary. Next slide. And this is the map of Galicia. You can see here Lemberg, which is the German name for Lviv, which is the capital of Western Ukraine. We also have Rzeszów here and Peremysh, which are, here's Peremysh over here, which is a center for Ukrainians in southeastern Poland. And this area here is the area where many of the Lemkos came from. Galicia became a province of Austria-Hungary after the first partition of Poland in 1772. It has a colorful history going back into the Middle Ages, but this area was taken over by the Polish kingdom in the 14th century, and many of the Ruthenian Ukrainians who were there became part of the Polish Empire. And so until 1772, they were under the Poles. Beginning in 1772, the growing it was the Austrian Empire initially, and then Austro-Hungarian Empire began to encompass this region. And in general, it was a very poor region. And as the population grew, there was less availability of land. And so beginning in the later part of the 19th century, some of these residents here from this area, which was the Lemko region, began to go to the US because there were steamship agents and railroad agents who were actually connected with the growing industrial base in the United States, primarily the East Coast. And so the mines there were looking for strong backs and able-bodied workers. And so they came to try to promote the mines in Pennsylvania to these people, and some of them went. But when they came to Ellis Island, of course, and so some of them ended up going through New Jersey and staying there rather than going onward. Next slide. They were primarily economic migrants, looking to earn money and go back home, and some of them did that. For example, my own great uncle, Mikhailo Cherepanyak, arrived here in Perth Amboy in the period about 1907, 1908, began to raise a family here, went into business for himself. He had a grocery store, and he also had a building supply company. But then eventually, just before the war, because of his wife, who just never felt quite comfortable here, they decided to go back to Przemysłowo, which is just south of Predky in the southeast region of Poland. So he was able to earn some money here and then go back to the old country. There was a strong religious Greek Catholic, but weak ethnic national identity. In many ways, what was happening in Galicia at the time was extremely confusing. We have groups of people who begin to identify as Ukrainian, but they were originally under Austria-Hungary called Ruthenians. Then we have smaller groups of Lemkos, some of whom sided with the Ukrainians and others did not. Some consider themselves to be a separate ethnic and national group. So when they came here, these differences and conflicts and confusion in some cases carried over into the New World. And so you'll see even in New Jersey, where we might have several different groups of Ukrainians or Ruthenians in one geographic area, having churches that either had a Ukrainian orientation or had a Hungarian orientation, or also none of the above. Next slide. Ukrainians were first recorded by the US Census in 1899 as Ruthenians. So you'll be hard-pressed to find any Ukrainians here at that period of time, because the concept of Ukraine was just beginning to evolve within Austria-Hungary. It really didn't become solidified until after World War I, when the Ukrainian people declared independence in 1918 and fought for their independence from 1918 to 1921. About 200,000 to 250,000 Ruthenians arrived in the US at this time. Half of all the Ukrainians entering the US between 1877 and 1830 gave Pennsylvania as their final destination. And for example, my own paternal side of the family, my grandfather and grandmother came here 1911, 1913 from Przemysłowo in southeastern Poland. They settled in Perth Amboy for a period of about 10 years. and then eventually wound up heading to coal country because my grandfather had a cousin who had gone out there to work in the mines. And so some of the Ukrainians came through New Jersey and then went to coal country. Other Ukrainians who came to New Jersey went through New Jersey, went to coal country, and eventually came back again. And you'll see that when we start talking about Millville in southern New Jersey. And these Ukrainians primarily settled in industrial cities and, as I pointed out, mining areas. And actually, some of them settled in a mining area near Rockaway Township now in New Jersey, in the Randolph area. So we had some mining areas here. It was primarily mining iron ore. Next slide, Michael. In terms of some of the early New Jersey Ukrainian communities, we have urban areas like Jersey City, and I mentioned Paulo Filak, who arrived there in 1880. Perth Amboy, the first Ukrainians began coming there in 1884. We had semi-rural areas like Whippany, where a community of Ukrainians started around 1908 to work in the woolen mills in that area. Boundbrook, about 1910. Then we had rural areas in northwest New Jersey and southern New Jersey. Northwest, the Great Meadows area, 1906. And we still have many Ukrainians out in that area now engaged in, they were originally engaged in farming, and some of them are still engaged in farming. And then Millville, a large colony of Ukrainians, began to develop in 1910. And we have profiles on these areas that you can see on the Ukrainian History Education Center website. So I'd like to encourage you after this talk to go and take a look at these profiles. And then we have suburbs like Hillside that developed in the 1920s, Irvington and Maplewood in the 1930s. And then a bit of a ghost in Ukrainian New Jersey history is the Ukrainian real estate development in the Piscataway Newmarket area called Nova Ukraina, which started in 1927. Next slide, please. So why did Ukrainians start off in Jersey City? Well, it was a transshipment point for goods to and from New York City and a manufacturing hub. At that time, the railroads began to develop actually in New Jersey in the 1850s, and they began bringing goods from all over the country, and the railroads would terminate in Jersey City. So there were massive rail yards down there, and the goods had to get across to New York. So there were ferries that took the goods across the river. And so there were plenty of jobs for unskilled labor. So as these Ukrainians came through Ellis Island, some of them ended up staying in Jersey City. The Greek Catholic parish of Saints Peter and Paul was formed in 1887, and it gradually grew into a very large parish. First, it was in the area which is now known as Dickinson High School area, and then eventually moved back downtown into the area that was eventually taken over by the Colgate-Palmolive Company. And then later on in the 1960s, the parish moved uptown into the Bergen section. Jersey City became an important cultural and educational center. Next slide, please. Here you have a photo of the first issue of Svoboda, the Ukrainian newspaper that's been published continuously since 1893 in Jersey City. Next slide. Incidentally, the Svoboda newspaper also has a companion section to it, not a section, but its own newspaper, the Ukrainian Weekly, which began publishing in Jersey City in 1933 and is still published today. The Ukrainian National Association was a fraternal benefit organization established in Shamokin, Pennsylvania in 1894 as the Ruski Narodny Soyuz, or Russian National Union. And at that time, for our people, Ruski did not refer to Russia per se, but rather the kingdom of Rus. They moved back from Shamokin to Jersey City and to a new headquarters in 1910. And here you see the first home for the Ukrainian National Association here in 1910 on Grant Street. And these are some photos of early members of the Ukrainian National Association from the 1920s. They had quite a few chapters that developed not only in New Jersey, but throughout the country, and a couple even in Canada throughout the 1930s and 40s and 50s. Next slide, please. Newark was also a major manufacturing hub, primarily for leather goods, tanning, and so forth. Eastern Europeans began settling in increasing numbers during the early 1900s, initially in the ironbound section, which today is the section where many Portuguese people live and also Brazilians. So it's still an ethnic enclave in Newark. And prior to that time, Newark had been settled by German immigrants and also Irish immigrants. There was great religious diversity there was great religious diversity in Newark in the early days, and it included Greek Catholic, Ukrainian Orthodox, and even Presbyterian parishes. Next slide. So what you see here is a photo of the Ukrainian Presbyterian Church, which was founded in Newark during that period of time. It was founded in 1907 and eventually grew to be a very large congregation. And it was interesting because it was a group of Ukrainians who originally were Greek Catholic, but because of a controversy, a conflict within the local Greek Catholic Church of St. John the Baptist, a group of parishioners decided to break off and form their own parish, and they petitioned the Presbyterian Church to take them in, and so that's how this began. There's a very important individual who was part of that parish from 1912 to 1917, the Reverend Vasil Kuzyu, who was part of the Presbyterian Cemetery at Bloomfield College during that period of time. And Bloomfield College had a seminary going back into the late 19th century. And what's interesting about this is he actually had a program for the seminarians teaching Ukrainian studies with the intent that some of these seminarians would eventually become missionaries and go to Ukraine with him to try to convert Ukrainians in Ukraine from Orthodoxy and Greek Catholicism to Presbyterianism. But he was a great humanitarian at the time. He made many missions abroad, and he raised funds to help Ukraine during that very great period of turmoil between, not only between the two world wars, but after. So he traveled quite a bit. Next slide. Millville in Cumberland County in southern New Jersey, which is not too far from the bridge that goes into Philadelphia. In 1912, the Ukrainian real estate agent Wasil Metolich advertised land for sale in Millville in Svoboda newspaper. About 200 families came and built homes, farm buildings, schools, and 2 churches. And you see here, you can see the ad that was in Svoboda at the time. And, you know, talking about Svoboda, Svoboda became this, if you will, it was like the internet of the day for the Ukrainians in New Jersey, and indeed for Ukrainians throughout the US, because Ukrainians would advertise in there and keep in touch with each other that way. So it was a very important institution within the community. And so in 1912, these Ukrainians ended up in Millville. But one of the issues that developed was that the soil in the Millville area, while it was perfect for glass making, which was the primary industry there, it was not so good to grow the kinds of crops that the Ukrainians were used to growing back in Ukraine and in southeastern Poland. So by about 1914, there was almost an open revolt in the community, and they were accusing Svoboda of false advertising in trying to draw them there. But eventually, they figured out a way of planting some kind of cash crops to become truck gardens for New Jersey. And indeed, over time, Ukrainians began to come from farming areas within the US, for example, North Dakota. Some of the Ukrainians who ended up in North Dakota came back to the East Coast and settled in Millville in Cumberland County. So it was an important community there. Next slide. Now, here's a photo of some of the Ukrainian homes, which were, the Narodny Diem. These were centers where Ukrainians could have cultural activities and fraternal activities and so forth that were separate from the churches that they attended. Next slide. The second wave of immigration, the Immigration Act of 1924 severely limited new arrivals. And only about 15,000 Ukrainians came to the US between 1924 and 1945. And many of them, indeed, at that time, did settle in the New York metropolitan area, and some of them came to New Jersey. It included both economic migrants and political refugees. And we'll talk about a political refugee in a moment as we begin to talk about the Nova Ukraina real estate development in the Piscataway South Plainfield area. Next slide. During the interwar period, we began to see within the Ukrainian community a transition from what had been a Ruthenian community to a solid Ukrainian community. Community organizations expanded at this time, and there was the establishment of more heritage schools and cultural activities, and even some full-time day schools within the Ukrainian community. For example, in Passaic, New Jersey, in the 1930s. Next slide. And here you have, this is the Ukrainian Center in Jersey City. And
yeah, well, this is actually the Ukrainian National Association building.
Okay, yeah. Michael, I think you have some slides in here that you want to talk about, right?
Yeah, well, I can take over starting here, and then I can hand it back off to you.
Yep.
Yeah, so the Ukrainian National Association, which had that little building on Grand Street, they in 1927 they purchased the neighboring lot, and they decided to raise both of the structures on those two buildings, and they built a whole new headquarters building, which opened in late 1928. That building that you see there on the right is actually still there. Mike, you can confirm. I believe it's been turned.
It's still there, and it's private condominiums.
Yes, so it has been turned into condos, but you can actually see there it does still have that seal of the Ukrainian National Association there with the American and Ukrainian flags. The frieze across the top still says Ukrainian National Association. The people who live there might have no idea what happened in that building, but what happened in that building was quite a massive sort of vertically integrated publishing enterprise. So you can see here, these are photos from, I believe, right around that time, where sort of going, so the upper left is the administration office for the Svoboda newspaper. On the top right is their editorial offices, and on the bottom you have the linotype operators doing the typesetting, and probably in the basement, was their actual rotary presses where they actually published the paper. It was all done in that building. So it's pretty amazing. Uh, and there were lots of cultural organizations that got started. I mean, even before World War II, World War One as well. So in the top left is the Boyan Singing Society photo. Boyan Singing Society from Newark, I believe that is. It's a photo from 1910. The marching band, I'm not quite sure what the date is. It was undated, but also Newark. And on the bottom is a dance ensemble of the what is called the Chornomorska Sich. Some of you may have heard of it. It's this organization still exists. They don't do dance ensembles anymore, but they began as part of this Sich organization, which was sort of one of these physical culture slash athletic organizations from the beginning of the 20th century, and kind of similar to the Polish or Czech Sokol uh, groups of that same time period. They, after the period of Ukrainian, or during or and after the period of the Ukrainian independence in the early part of the 20th century, some of them started developing kind of more almost paramilitary overtones. They like to sort of dress up in uniforms and march around and do drills. But then they also were involved in sporting activities, as you will see a little bit later. And here in this photo from 1934, they had a dance ensemble. Uh, Schools started, as Mike already mentioned. So this is St. John the Baptist Ukrainian Catholic on the left, and Holy Ascension uh, in Newark, Orthodox on the right. They also developed businesses. So this is, for example, the building of the what in English they referred to as the National Supply Company in Carteret. In Ukrainian, it's Narodna Torhovля, which could be translated as national or people's trade. So people were definitely doing that, and kind of appropriate for election day having been yesterday, they got involved in politics, including American politics. So in this area, the sort of the northeastern New Jersey, Newark, Passaic um, area, there was enough of a critical mass of Ukrainians that they could endorse candidates. They could get um, local politicians who were campaigning to address to give to basically campaign targeting at the Ukrainian community. So it's a bit less so these days, but then it seems, if you look at the newspapers, it was not an uncommon occurrence. Sports, as I already mentioned, this is the on the left is the baseball team that was fielded by the Chornomorska Sich out of Newark in 1931. As I mentioned, the Chornomorska Sich is still around. They're primarily, again, athletic, soccer, and maybe other sporting activities, but they have a Facebook page. They're on social media. Uh, but their roots go back into the beginning of the 20th century. In the middle there is the sort of the parish basketball team of St. Demetrius Ukrainian Orthodox Parish in Carteret from the 1940s. Um, and on the far right is baseball scores for a amateur baseball league that a Ukrainian team called the Ukrainian Aces participated in. Uh, so that was definitely a part of the community. So, Mike, you want to take away for Nova Ukraina?
Yep. So as we were talking earlier, this is one of the interesting Ukrainian American ghosts that I found as I begin to do research for this article. Um, in March of 1927, a large advertisement appeared in the Sloboda newspaper for a new real estate development in the South Plainfield/Piscataway area by something called the Globe Service Company, and it was called Nova Ukraina. And it was advertising moderately priced homes, and moderately priced at that time was $2,450 for Ukrainians who worked in factories. These homes were planned, each with a backyard chicken coop and a truck that would bring coal directly from the anthracite region of Pennsylvania. And it's kind of interesting. You'll notice the address for it is 30 East 7th Street. This was actually, the office was right next to the Surma Book and Music Company in New York City. And that was not by accident, because Myron Surma, I don't know how many of you know the backstory on him, but I had done some writing about him for Ukrainian Weekly years ago. Myron Surma came to the US in 1910. He went out to coal country initially and then came back to New York City because he just didn't want to be a miner. And eventually he got into business and formed his own company, first on 2nd Avenue and then later on 7th Street. And it became known as the Surma Book and Music Company, better known as Surmas. And so that institution existed in the Ukrainian community on 7th Street right up until 2016. Myron Surma passed away in the 1990s. His son, Myron Jr., passed away in the early part of the 2000s. And his grandson actually closed up shop in 2016. And so Myron Surma was one of the movers and shakers behind this Globe Service Company. I guess he was an investor in it because, he had such pull within the community that they thought it was a good idea to have him on board. But one of the key people in this group was a guy by the name of Kalenic Lysyuk, 1888 to 1980. Now, Kalenic Lysyuk had come from central Ukraine. His birth name is Grigory Lepikash. And the reason he had to change his name along the way was he was part of a democratic socialist revolutionary group under the Russian Empire. And eventually he was almost sent off to Siberia, before the Russian Revolution. And so he decided to change his name to Kalenic Lysyuk so he wouldn't be pursued anymore by the secret police. During the revolution, the Ukrainian Revolution from 1918 to 1921, he became part of that. And he was actually part of something called the Free Cossack movement. But when the Ukrainians failed to maintain their independence after 1921, and got subsumed by the growing Soviet Union, he decided to emigrate to the US. And so he came here in 1923, established himself as a philatelist. So he was a stamp collector and established a business that way in Brooklyn. And then eventually got some folks together to start looking at real estate along with Myron Surma. So that was the development of this Globe Service Company. Next slide. Here's a map of Nova Ukraina. And you can see, it was fairly extensive. It would have really created a Ukrainian colony right there in the Piscataway South Plainfield area if it ever took off. This is the area today. You can see it's along Stilton Road, and this is Route 287 south here. And this is where it was. But unfortunately, the community never really did take off. By the 1940s, there were only some 35 people who bought homes there of various Eastern European ethnicities, including Ukrainians, but some Russians and Poles as well. And eventually, by the 1950s, the whole project kind of petered out. And Lisiuk ended up heading out to California. And he did make some money, I think, in the stamp collecting business and a little bit of money in real estate. And so he founded a Ukrainian museum out there. I think it was Oxford, California. And eventually he became involved in very conservative politics in the US with the John Birch Society. But it was an interesting chapter in the history of Ukrainian Americans in New Jersey, since he was very much involved in this development of a Ukrainian colony here in the Piscataway, South Plainfield area. Next slide. So after World War II, we have a third wave of Ukrainian immigration. And Michael, I think I'll turn this over to you at this point.
Sure, yeah. And just the museum that Lisiuk founded was actually in Ontario, California.
Ontario,
Yeah.
right.
And it later ended up merging with the Ukrainian National Museum in Chicago. So
okay.
that's the story of that. So yeah, the next really big wave, since that second wave after World War I was really less of a wave and more of a trickle. But after World War II, really was a wave. It was a major major migration. There was, as I believe Eleanor Roosevelt called it, the last million of refugees, mainly from Eastern Europe, were kind of stuck in Germany because they either could not or would not return home for a number of reasons. For many Ukrainians, it was they had seen Stalin firsthand and they really didn't want to have anything to do with them. And these are, of course, the million that had managed to stay in Germany and avoided forced repatriation, which is another entire story, which we don't have time to get into here. But about 85,000 Ukrainians ended up coming to the US in that period, with about 8,000 of them coming to New Jersey. So this is a very substantial number. It was in some ways kind of a shock to the system in a way. And it really, in many ways, changed the dynamic of a lot of these immigrant communities and ethnic communities. For the first time, it included significant numbers of people that had professional backgrounds, that were not just migrating for economic reasons. And more importantly, they came from throughout Ukraine, whereas these earlier waves tended to be from Western Ukraine. This wave included substantial numbers from Central and Eastern Ukraine. So in some cases, they settled in established communities that had been established by the previous waves. But sometimes they went ahead and founded their own organizations, their own parishes. And that kind of led to some interesting dynamics or perhaps even conflicts in some cases. Nonetheless, it was a very momentous event with regard to the Ukrainian community. In some ways, almost an insularity developed where there was this attitude of like, well, Ukrainians and Ukrainian language and culture is being destroyed by the Soviets. So therefore, we must preserve it here. And so there was this circling of the wagons, and let's we have to teach our kids to speak Ukrainian. We have to teach them Ukrainian culture, and that was a dynamic that definitely did exist in that period, and that continued to exist really until the fall of the Soviet Union. There were Ukrainian specific youth organizations that developed. There had been Ukrainian scouts before, but they were really part of like the American Boy Scout and Girl Scout organizations. The first sort of Ukrainian specific scouting organizations like the Plast Ukrainian scouts really only arose in starting in this period. And another thing that's kind of sometimes overlooked is this was also the period when the first credit unions were organized. And these played a major role, not only in giving recent and older migrants a place where they could do banking in a community with with an organization that spoke their language, that knew their culture and knew their community, but also these credit unions gave back to the community. They were actually supporting organizations, and they continue to do that. Um, they uh, so that really began in this period as well. This period after this massive first wave, the massive wave, there was really very, very little migration, mainly because it was really hard to get out of the Soviet Union. And I mean, there was some migration coming out of Poland occasionally, but it was pretty small. So the communities that already existed here sort of evolved in this sort of ongoing equilibrium, I would almost call it. The Ukrainian National Association at that point moved into a 15-story office building in Jersey City in 1974. They then ended up moving again to Parsippany in 1997. The other phenomenon that we see in this period is sort of a consolidation of these community centers. So the other trend that happened in that period is you have this flight to the suburbs. And so instead of having these very tightly clustered communities in urban or in some cases rural settings, you had this dispersion. And so in order to maintain the community, you would have these sort of central places where the community could meet. One of them would be the Ukrainian American Cultural Center in Whippany. So even though there had been Ukrainians in the Whippany area since the early 1900s, the big cultural center that's there now really didn't develop until considerably later. Another major center, which I will talk about a little bit more in a second, is St. Andrew Memorial Church and Cemetery and the entire Metropolia Center, Ukrainian Orthodox Metropolia Center here in southbound Brook, Somerset. And then another phenomenon is which existed for a while, really until the early 1990s, was the massive Ukrainian festival that took place at the Garden State Arts Center, later the PNC Bank Arts Center in Holmdel. I'm not going to go into that a lot, but I do have some video, if we have time, which we probably won't because we want to leave some time for questions. So St. Andrew Memorial Church and St. Andrew Cemetery, this was a property that was purchased in the 1950s, 1951, by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the USA. A cemetery was founded there starting in 1954, and it ended up becoming what is now the largest predominantly Ukrainian cemetery outside of Ukraine. It is quite large. There are many extremely famous individuals buried there, to the point that visitors from Ukraine, say coming into New York, will often make a trip into New Jersey specifically to visit the cemetery. Of course, there are also thousands of quote unquote ordinary Ukrainian Americans from all over the US, not just from New Jersey. This has become sort of almost like the central or one of the main places for uh, to be buried. And this includes not just Ukrainian Orthodox, but lots of Ukrainian Catholics, people of other faiths, and in cases no faith at all, but who were buried there because this was the Ukrainian place to sort of this Ukrainian center of gravity, if you will. St. Andrew Memorial Church, which you see there, which was consecrated in 1963, is, among other things, the first memorial in the world to the victims of the genocidal famine of 1932-1933, known as the Holodomor. The land, one of the first European owners of that land, is actually also pretty interesting in terms of American and New Jersey history in the colonial times. Was a man named Hendrik Fisher. I'm sorry, I need to fix that I keep misspelling his first name. Hendrik Fisher. He was quite an important person in colonial New Jersey history. He was a delegate from New Jersey to the Stamp Act Congress of 1754. He was a member of the Committee of Correspondence and Committee of Safety. He was, among other things, the president of the body that would become the New Jersey legislature. And he played a pretty critical role in the formation of Queens College, which would later become Rutgers University. In fact, it was partly at his instigation that it ended up in New Brunswick and not in Hackensack, which was the other location they were considering. He was in Philadelphia during 1776 Continental Congress. He was not a delegate, but he was there, and he brought a copy of the Declaration of Independence to the Bound Brook area, which he read was like one of the first readings of the Declaration of Independence, certainly in central New Jersey. I'm going to skip over the Garden State Arts Center, but you can view this video on our YouTube channel, it's also linked from our stories page on our website. But I'm going to skip that over. Mike, you want to sort of wrap it up with the fourth and fifth waves?
Yeah, I'll bring it home.
Yep.
The fourth and fifth waves, with the period of glasnost and perestroika and the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukrainian immigrants began to arrive again in the US and in particular in New Jersey. Again, it was mainly an economic migration at this time. About 6,000 Ukrainian immigrants came to New Jersey in 2000, with a total of 250,000 immigrants to the entire US by 2010. Currently, we're in the midst of a fifth wave of immigration, which is war refugees. By September 13th, 2022, over 7,000 people in New Jersey had applied to sponsor Ukrainian war refugees. And the status of this program is in doubt at this point due to federal policy changes, and it's still in a period of great flux. So that's pretty much it. We have not put up the part 2 of the history of Ukrainians in New Jersey yet on the website. Michael's still working on that. We're hoping to see that up online sometime before the end of the year, or at least the beginning of next year. So if you want to see the detail on what we've covered today, as Michael pointed out, we didn't have a handout per se. The handout is online. So you can go through this. There's an overview, a first overview to give you a general flavor for what happened. And then we go into specifically a number of different communities. But I do want to point out, this is not encyclopedic. There are other places like the Ukrainian community in Elizabeth, which I didn't cover, and some other ones in the state. But suffice it to say, Ukrainians have formed an important part of the state since 1880 and continue to do that. Michael, I'll turn it back to you. Oh,
Yeah.
one other thing very quickly, a plug for my podcast. Someone asked how long I have worked for Svoboda. I have never actually worked for them per se. I've contributed articles to the Ukrainian Weekly beginning in the year 2001 to about 2016. And then since about 4 years ago, I began to produce a podcast, Krynytsia, The Well, which is sponsored by the Ukrainian Weekly. And I have about 150 episodes up online at this point. So I encourage you to go there if you're interested in Ukrainians, not just in New Jersey, but around the world. We cover topics related to the war, but we also covered things about Ukrainian genealogy and culture and history and education and so forth. Okay, Michael.
Yeah. Okay. So we have some questions here. There's something in the chat there about displaced persons. We'll come back to that later. Let's hit some of the ones that are in the Q&A. So Mike, maybe you might know this better than I do. Did Ukrainians in New Jersey have much interaction with Ukrainians and Carpatho-Russians in Minnesota during the first wave of immigration? I'm not aware of any, but maybe you.
No, I don't think so, because they're basically two very distinct groups. I think the ones in Minnesota, and correct me if I'm wrong, were more associated with the Hungarian orientation. And so, there was a conflict there. The ones that we have here in New Jersey primarily came from some villages in southeastern Poland and also areas in Western Ukraine, what was then known as Eastern Galicia. So no, I don't think there was much interaction between them.
Okay, there's a question here, and I'm not sure. Curious what would attract Ukrainians to Somerville, New Jersey. My uncle is from Kyiv, settled there before relocating to NYC. If in the chat you could put in what time period this would have been, that might help with that. To the best of my knowledge, there was not a huge community in Somerville. There was some in the area, because we see 1910, really. I'm not sure. It was actually pretty, it was also fairly unusual for ethnic Ukrainians from central Ukraine to um, migrate. If perhaps your family is actually Jewish, if so, that's a rather different dynamic, and there may very well have been a Jewish a Jewish community in the area. I'm not sure. I wouldn't know. I don't know, Mike. Yes, he was Jewish. Okay, that would explain it. Yeah. So our project is really primarily focusing on sort of people who identified as ethnic Ukrainian. So that the whole migration of Jews from Central and from the basically from the Russian imperial pale of settlement is a huge topic, and it's really outside of our scope. But that's a question you could bring to folks, say, at the Center for Jewish History in New York City. That they would be in a much better place to tackle that. Well, I can give a short answer to do you know or could speculate why Ukrainian Lemko immigrants would move on from industrial work in Jersey City to coal communities in Northeast Pennsylvania? Well, there was work there, and some of these agents were specifically working on behalf of these mines, I believe, if that is correct, Mike. You can probably elaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. You had agents going, trying to bring these able-bodied workers to Pennsylvania. And of course, my own family is an example of that, where my grandfather and grandmother went to Perth Amboy first, stayed there a couple of years, and then because he had a cousin out there, decided to head out. I think the pay was good relative at the time, and there was plenty of work. The problem over time, of course, is that in 1929, the Great Depression came along and put a lot of people out of work, so that by like 1935 in coal country, about 50% of all able-bodied workers were out of work at that time. So while it seemed like a good decision, maybe in the teens in the 1920s, it turned out to be not the best decision later on.
Yeah, and uh, my mind just blanked as to what I was going to say. Um, but yeah, anyway, so moving on, does the UHEC have a collection of photographs pertaining to the Assumption Church of Perth Amboy? No, we do not. That is, I believe, is still a going concern, and so you might be able to contact them directly. Um, any collections pertaining to the Ukrainian church, I'm assuming the Ukrainian Orthodox one that used to be in South Plainfield. Yes, we do have those parish records, and that is because the UHEC is the designated repository that has been designated by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the USA for um, preserving and providing access to records of closed UOC of USA parishes. So yes, we do have material from there. If you're interested and want to do research in that, please contact me, although that might be a little tricky for reasons because
Hey,
we're the
Michael, I just wanted
yep.
to interject here regarding the Assumption Church in Perth Amboy.
Oh yes,
Do you have a copy of their Jubilee book
yes
from
we do.
1983?
Yes, I'm pretty sure we do. Yeah.
Okay, so for the person interested in Perth Amboy, that book is a gold mine. It not only has a lot of photographs and so forth, but also has profiles of the prominent families in the church all the way up to 1983 from 1908. So if you want to see that book, you can go down to the center in Somerset and take a look through it. I've used it extensively in research on different projects that I've done, including this one.
Uh, our good friend Olga is mentioning about the UNA. Yes, there were branches. Sometimes there was more than one branch in even in a given community or in a given city. So, for example, places like Newark and Perth Amboy and Trenton actually had had more than one branch. Yeah, they did a lot of stuff, including much more than just publishing a newspaper. They had insurance and whatnot. Yes, absolutely. What was the impetus of the first wave of immigration? It was, as we said, it was primarily economic. It was really pretty desperate poverty. Um, my father's always said that grandpa was avoiding war conflict. I mean, there really weren't any wars going on there until 1914. Um, which is when World War I broke out. He may have been trying to avoid getting drafted into the army. That's a possibility. He may have been he may have been avoiding conscription, but most of the impetus was the push factor of poverty and the pull factor of available work. Uh, Was there any strife between the Ukrainian and Polish immigrants in the early wave? Oh yes, indeedy, there was. You can, if you go on our web resource, there are a bunch of articles that from even the English language newspapers describing some of that. And yes, that was a pretty sore point, kind of in the 20s and 30s, mainly in the 30s. Um, There was a question. Oh, yes, there is a movie about Ukrainian Catholics in New Jersey standing united, the history of Ukrainian Catholic parishes in New Jersey. That's fantastic. We will definitely link to that in our resource. Thank you for letting us know about that. Bum. There was something. Manville, yes, absolutely. So there were definitely were and are Ukrainians in Manville. They probably came fairly. They were definitely part of the first two waves. I'm not sure when they settled there, but it would have been probably slightly later. Um, can you comment a little bit more on displaced persons? Were they primarily in work camps? I have given an entire hour-long talk about this, but the short answer is some of them were forced laborers, so-called Ostarbeiter. They Many of them were well from all over what is present-day Ukraine and present-day Poland, uh, but not all of them. So some of them were actually people who fled ahead of the advancing Red Army, basically because again they did not want to get um, uh, stranded under Stalin, and so they fled as refugees going west, ending up in Western Germany and mainly in the American and British zones, and they ended up in these camps, um, where they basically lived. They weren't really work camps. They were literally refugee camps. So um, it would be tricky to learn which camp she was in unless you have some information. If you have names and dates, you might be able to use the Arlosen International Tracing Service archives in Germany, who would be who might be able to chase down information on that. But it could be tricky, but you might hit the jackpot.
Michael, I just wanted to
Yeah,
point out to that person, I don't see her name up here now in the questions and answers, but try ancestry.com, believe it or not.
hmm.
Put your cousin's name in there to see if there are any records from her immigrating to the US. You know, I have found lately, as I've been researching people, because I do a lot of Ukrainian genealogy, that sometimes they mention the camp that the person was in records.
Hmm. Okay,
So
good to
I
know.
wouldn't discount that.
All
Try
right.
it and see what you can find.
Okay. Okay, a few more things. Uh, our friend Yurkov, most of the early parishes in Pennsylvania had both Ukrainians and Carpatho-Russians. Absolutely, yes. Yep, absolutely. That is definitely true. Were any Ukrainians in New Jersey involved in the post-World War I food relief efforts under Hoover's American Relief Administration? I have not come across anything. Mike, have you?
No, I've not seen anything.
Yeah. Um, Maybe perhaps, but not in not in sufficient numbers that we would. I mean, there were definitely a lot of activism. So if you see that top subjects of source items that you have up on the screen there on their website, you see the middle one of the top row is activism. If you click on that, you'll get a lot of information about how Ukrainians were trying to help Ukrainians in New Jersey were trying to help Ukrainians in mainly what would then have been the Second Polish Republic.
Well, and
Go ahead.
I mentioned earlier this pastor from the Ukrainian Presbyterian Church in Newark.
Right.
He was involved in some relief efforts. I didn't really dig down into it to see if it was anything formal through the Hoover Relief Administration or not, but he might have been involved in it. That's Reverend Vasil Kozyl, who was pastor of the Ukrainian Presbyterian Church in Newark from 1912 to 1917. But I know in the 1930s, he was very active in humanitarian efforts. So anyway.
Yes. So, Olga, no, we do not have any research that I know of on St. Thomas in Rahway or other of those parishes, but that would almost be another another whole research topic, Mike, unless you happen to have anything.
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yep. Natalia, do you was there did you need to be unmuted or
Yeah, I just wanted
okay.
to go back to the question about Ukrainians helping post-World War One, Ukrainians. I happen to be a member of SUA, the Ukrainian Women's Group, the Ukrainian National Women's League, who just celebrated their anniversary. Although it's a little bit later, their 100th anniversary, their centennial. Although they were formed in 1925, they were a very well organized group of Ukrainian women that had branches throughout the United States that did do a lot of outreach, both to Ukrainians in the United States as well as providing support to Ukrainians in Ukraine. Just wanted to put that out there as well.
Okay, a couple of very quick questions since we are well over time, but I'm going to definitely answer this because we will have information on this in the phase 2 part of the project that will be going live next month. Were there any sort of Cossack presence or identity among Ukrainian immigrants? Oh, yes, there were. They were, some of them were actually from the Kuban region of the Northern Caucasus. There's actually a whole group of them down in South Jersey.
Bella
Yeah,
Vista, New Jersey.
yeah, yeah. Buena Vista, New Jersey. Yes.
Buena Vista. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
And it's there'll be more information on that on our
Part 2.
on our part 2. Yeah, absolutely. 155 First Avenue. Are you familiar with that address, Mike? In
No,
Elizabeth?
no, never
No.
came
Okay.
across
I
that.
wonder. Yeah. I, who knows? I mean, yeah. So they would typically give an address, um, a destination address that would then get recorded in the manifest. So maybe that was just someone they happened to know, and that was like the nucleus for this sort of chain migration, and that's what they reported as the addresses. They really perhaps didn't even really know where they were going. Um, that may be a plausible reason for that. Um, anyway, all right. There are no more questions. Thank you for hanging on to the bitter end here. This webinar was recorded, and we will be putting it up somewhere on our website. Thank you all for coming. Have a great evening and have
A happy Thanksgiving.
happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays after that. Yes, very good.